Well, welcome back to 42nd Street Pete's Grindhouse and part two of our Heavies edition here. I'm trying to think where I stopped. Did I stop at George Kennedy? I think I did. So next in line would be Richard Kiley. I don't know much about him either, but I do know about Jack Lambert, who was a great heavy starting in the 40s and worked up until the 60s. I think his last role was for Texas, and he's one of those guys that was around all the time, but really got disgusted about acting in general and always being typecast as the heavy. So he retired, and I believe him and his wife opened an antique store. Martin Landau, okay, another guy who specialized in sleazy heavies, but then all of a sudden got on, I think, Mission Impossible, and of course became an Oscar winner for Ed Wood, Best Supporting Actor playing Bela Lugosi, and that got him out of doing B movies like Without Warning and Alone in the Dark. Mark Lawrence was another sinister character, and I believe I think Mark might have left the country because he was accused, that whole McCarthy thing, anti-American activities or some shit like that. I don't know. Darren McGavin, who started as a heavy, but also became TV's beloved Night Stalker. Charles McGraw, who was more of a 40s type guy who always played gangsters or tough cops. John McIntyre, who would sometimes play a heavy and sometimes play a sympathetic character, mostly in westerns. George McCready, who actually his son, I think his son was the guy who might have directed the Count Yorga films, and George did the voiceover. Ross Martin, another guy who started as a sleazy heavy but then found fame on TV in the Wild Wild West. Lee Marvin, what can't you say about Lee Marvin, one of our most beloved character actors and a true fucking wild man. And before he did Cat Ballou, he was a really nasty heavy. He was the guy who threw a scalding pot of coffee in Gloria Graham's face at one time. Walter Matthau. I got an interesting thing about Walter Matthau. Him and Lon Chaney Jr. were teamed up as scumbags in Kirk Douglas's The Scalp Hunter as basically Indian killers or something like that. And I believe Walter was skinned alive at the end of that movie. Ralph Meeker, another guy who came in strong. He played, Mike Hammer, I believe, in Kiss Me Deadly, also with Jack Lambert and Jack Elam as the heavies. He became the lead in a couple films and also was in The Dirty Dozen. I believe his last movie was Without Warning too. Gary Merrill, who could basically vacillate between good guys and bad guys. Emil Meyer, who played cops, prison wardens, and sometimes outlaws. Robert Middleton, who was a really big dude who could basically play a sinister heavy or a sympathetic character like in The Big Combo. Let's see. Vic Morrow, who started out as a scumbag heavy, was Sergeant Chip Saunders in TV's Combat, and unfortunately died a hero as he was decapitated for real in The Twilight Zone. Alex Nicole, another guy who bounced around, pretty tall guy. He was in an early spaghetti western, The Gunfighters of Casa Grande, and also directed and starred in The Screaming Skull. Simon Oakland, who was another guy who played gangsters in westerns, and also I believe he had a role in The Night Stalker as well. Warren Oates, what can you say about Warren Oates? He appeared in The Twilight Zone a few times, played a heel, but most of the remembered for playing Sam Peckinpah in Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia. Edmund O'Brien, another guy from the Wild Bunch, that was one of his finest roles, but he was also in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance and played a mob boss in 99 and 99 Tenths Dead back in the 60s, 70s rather. Patrick O'Neill, sometimes a good guy, sometimes a bad guy. He was the Baltimore Butcher in Chamber of Horrors. He was the Mexican Commandant in El Condor. And I believe he had the unfortunate luck to be in a Steven Seagal movie. One of those Navy things. I can't remember the name of it because I really don't like Steven Seagal. Nemaya Persoff. Now here's a guy, I think he was like 103 when he passed away last year. And he was a heavy in the Comancheros with John Wayne and a few other things. And then he would be a good guy in some other westerns. A virtual legend that was lasted that long. Vincent Price. What can't we say about Vincent Price? Was a sinister heavy in the 40s and 50s, then graduated into horror films and never looked back. Aldo Ray, another guy who had a big push as a leading man, but could degenerate into a scumbag if he had to. He was the nasty sergeant in The Naked and the Dead, and unfortunately, I believe his last film was Evils of the Night with Neville Brand. Tom Reese, another guy who doesn't get a lot of recognition, a very familiar face. He was one of the Matt Hill movies. He was one of the gangsters in St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and the TV movie Stranger on the Run with Henry Fonda. Robert Ryan, another guy who could vacillate between a good guy and a bad guy. He was the nasty general in The Dirty Dozen. He was the bad guy in Bad Day at Black Rock, and the sympathetic sheriff in Lawman, and also Day of the Outlaw, where he was a hero and never even pulled his gun. Actually, Robert Ryan was supposed to be one hell of a boxer when he was in the military. Frank Silvera, a guy who was cast as Mexicans, Italians, and other people. Actually, he was really a Jamaican. He was a Mexican bandit in Guns of the Magnificent Seven, also in Hombre with Paul Newman. And he was also Nick Sorello in St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Sadly, he was electrocuted installing a garbage disposal. Rod Steiger, another guy who started out as a heavy and was one of our greatest character actors, a method actor, was incredible in The Pawnbroker. He played Al Capone in Al Capone, and also was in the spaghetti western Duck You Sucker. Ray Teal was another familiar face in a lot of movies. Rip Torn would become a household name on an HBO series. I think it was Larry Sanders' show, but also could play a heel and also was in Extreme Prejudice. Lee Van Cleef. What's the worst thing Lee Van Cleef ever did? Torture a man by turning up his hearing aid in The Big Combo, where he also did something really taboo in the 50s. Him and Errol Holliman played a gay hitman team. Robert Walker, who, I don't know if it's Robert Walker Sr. or Jr. They both seem to vacillate between playing heavies and good guys. Eli Wallach, another guy, a very versatile actor, could play Mexicans, Italians, mob guys, whatever. He was Tuco in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and was in The Godfather 3, another great actor. Robert Weber, another guy who was in The Dirty Dozen and also in the Sam Peckinpah Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia, where he and Gig Young played gay hitmen. Jesse White, who was a fast-talking heavy, who also became the Maytag Man. Richard Widmark, and here's a guy who's an A-list actor, but most people remember him from Kiss of Death when he pushed a woman in a wheelchair to her death down a flight of stairs. Robert J. Wilkie, another unsung guy from back in the day who was a familiar face. He was the guy who challenged James Coburn to the knife against gunfight in The Magnificent Seven and came out on the losing end. Claude Atkins once said in an interview that Robert Wilkie made a lot more money playing golf than he ever did acting. So that wraps up our Heavies edition, part 2. So thanks for subscribing. Thanks for tuning in. Big shout out to thefuseboxshow.com and Grindhouse Releasing. Stay safe, and we'll catch you on the flip side.